It's been incredibly difficult to figure out exactly what's so fascinating about Rings of Power. Nearly every aspect is a jumbled mess of terrible. But much like a traffic accident, one can't help but look.
You know my favorite accident? 2 buses and a chicken truck.
Unfortunately, though, also like a car wreck, this show seems to relish in bringing everything to a grinding halt, dragging out every little mind-numbing story well past its expiration date. Considering the first 3 episodes were released together, we're firmly beyond the halfway point now. But for some reason, it feels like the agony is never going to end. Each installment, despite being nearly identical in length to the previous, seems longer. Is it the inane filler conversations or the repetitive travel? Perhaps it's the fact that 2/3 of the characters don't need to exist. Well, whatever the reason, it has made this show an absolute slog, but one that I plan to see through to the bitter end. Opening up with what is honestly a beautiful shot of the misty mountains, we're lulled into a false sense of security and reminded that they spent an incomprehensible amount of money on this shit show, only to immediately transition to these garish-ass rings. If you want my opinion on those, be sure to check out the first video. King Darimbacil hears ominous voices whispering, but figures that's totally normal and just opts to put on the clearly haunted ring. The power of the ring apparently gives him an unnatural knowledge of the mountain itself, which allows him to tell the professional diggers that they don't know shit to get the fuck out of his way. Selecting a spot, he begins hammering away with a pickaxe despite Durin's protest that it's a foundation wall, which should collapse the entire structure around them, but the plot demands that it doesn't, so it just works. Let me back up for just a second and reiterate. This entire Lightshaft saga makes no sense. It's been going on for 5 episodes now, and it would seem the concept is pretty straightforward. Just dig where the old light shafts were. They collapsed, but they weren't weight-bearing. Just remove the debris and rebuild them. It's not rocket surgery, guys.
That's not even a word!
But I guess anything to pad the runtime of this season will do. He then starts finding more points to dig in order to find sunlight before saying this dumbass shit.
Pity those who dwell above, slaves to the sun.
In Kazakh Doom, we are free of its tyranny.
Huh?
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Does he not understand how retarded he sounds? Your kingdom was literally dying because you couldn't get sunlight. You're clearly slaves to it as well, you just need to take an extra step to get to it. If anything, you're more a slave to it because it's such a limited resource for you. This might be the single dumbest monologue in terms of not matching the scene in television history. With no passage of time whatsoever, Narvi has arrived in Eregion as an emissary to show the newly designed Gates of Durin. There's a bit of ego behind that, isn't there? They are to signify the long-thought impossible alliance between dwarves and elves by creating an easy traversal path between the kingdoms. Narvignoramus explains the system of how it works.
Unbreachable, visible only by moonlight, guarded by a password known only to friends.
Which seems needlessly complicated considering the fact that people are already teleporting from scene to scene.
When did she come in? Did you see her come in?
Moranitar sneaks off and is shortly joined by Celebrimboob, who wants to know why he's being such a moody teenager.
My remarks?
I encouraged you to keep it short.
I mean, he only spoke for like 30 seconds.
So a lasting friendship between elves and dwarves.
Not exactly like he was delivering the State of the Union address. So like, who is Sauron at this point? Is he the incredibly patient deceiver willing to play everyone from the background even if it means taking unnecessary beatings? Or is he this peevish child who has to have it his way like this is fucking Burger King? They briefly discuss the situation and Brimboob has reservations about rings for men, pointing out the manipulative nature of Moranitar's approach.
It is a game you play, sowing seeds in others' minds and then convincing them that the fruit is of their own thought.
This should be a red flag big enough for a bullfighter to use on the Balrog. He was warned of the psychological nature of Sauron by Galadriel, and he's clearly identified it's happening but is willingly complicit in its occurrence. They continue to argue over whether or not men are worth making rings for.
Much of the misery of men is of their own making.
Which is a sentiment that I fully agree with because we as a race made this goddamn show. Brimboob is afraid that men are too easily tempted and that the power of the rings would create more problems than solutions. Just put a bookmark in that, you'll want to remember that little detail. Moranitar attempts to convince him that they could find 9 incorruptible men, but Brimboob ain't buying that shit. And quite frankly, I'm not either, because I'm not even sure we've seen 9 people in this whole show I could call real men. Since Brimboob won't help him, Moranitar just decides...
Fine. I'll do it myself.
In Numenor, fashionista Pharazôn has officially taken up the scepter and is really angry about the sun setting or some shit.
The White Tower of Erisea, the very gateway to the Undying Lands. I reckon the elves placed it there on purpose.
Okay, but why though?
So that every sunset serves as a reminder that our days must end.
It's mostly because he knows he's gonna die long before the elves, but honestly, that's a pretty dumb thing to be mad at. I'm not 6'10", so odds are I wouldn't make it in the NBA, but I'm not gonna brood over that shit. Fashionista decides to tell his son Keeman, hold on a second, his name is Keeman? You are aware what that rhymes with, right? Thanks for making my job so easy on this one.
Here you go, BJ.
Well, he decides to tell Seaman some strangely delivered history.
Once, when you were at her breast,
That was so wrong.
your mother prophesied that you would come to ill ends.
He then flat out refuses to tell Seaman the details of what she said unless he can impress him with a task. What kind of psychopath tells his own child, your mother predicted bad shit for you and I won't tell you unless you do something for me? Later that night on the other side of town, former Queen Amanda Waller is talking to Discount Ellendale about how the people support Fashionista.
Listen to them.
There are other voices.
Which she's apparently cool with because it means Numenor won't burn to the ground after all.
Pharazôn's kingship is a part of that path, and so are you.
The following morning, Ellen Discount is surprised by a line of soldiers being stripped of their ranks due to loyalty to Queen Waller. When he questions who ordered this, to his dismay it turns out to be his own daughter, the facially symmetrical Iarian. He chastises her for her hypocrisy.
You were walking a treacherous path.
And yours is made of seawater.
What the hell is with all the terrible dialogue about water in this show? Despite this, what I guess passes for solid advice from Ellen Discount, Symmetry doesn't give a shit because she's a woman and therefore can do no wrong in her own eyes.
That is so sexist.
He then opts to give up his sword and is stripped of rank publicly by Seaman.
Please, there are ladies present.
A demotion which the soldiers overwhelmingly reject.
Thank you, Captain.
How do you think this ends?
This is the kind of thing that revolutions are built upon, by the way. Symmetry then pleads with Valendil to simp for her so she can remove him from the disgrace list, but he refuses. Fashionista visits the Elfstone. That's right, the very Elfstone that turned the entire kingdom against Queen Waller in record time. Gilga Dumbass receives the letter sent from Brimboob, which tells of the closing of the Forge, which we all know is bullshit, so this is pointless. Also, how did this letter, which was sent episodes ago, take this long to get to Lindon? We've seen characters traveling massive distances via graphics or simply just cutting to the next scene within these very episodes. Did the messengers go the wrong fucking way?
So we backtracked a tad! A tad, Lloyd!
At this point, it's impossible for us as the audience to perceive the timelines or travel distances. As he's reading the letter, his general comes to inform him that the Armada is ready and pressures him to invade Mordor. Wait a minute! Isn't Mordor landlocked and surrounded by mountains? What the fuck is an Armada gonna do? Seriously! How is it that $1 billion has been sunk into this project and no one has Googled a goddamn map of Middle-earth? Travels which should take multiple episodes happen instantly and everyone not on screen ceases to exist. And despite all this magical teleporting people seem to do, it does nothing in the way of making these episodes any shorter. If anything, it's bogged them down further because the word assemblers feel they can cram in more dumb bullshit that just slows everything down. Anyway, Durin and Elephant Lady argue whether or not the power of the ring is a good thing.
That rhymes, Marge, and you know it rhymes.
But now they've decided to swap roles.
You pushed for this.
I know. Learning to hear the mountains, a gift from Owley, one that's honed and refined over a lifetime. And this, it feels somehow like cheating.
This honestly just comes off as sour grapes now that she's out of a job. They then go to the market where they seek to buy a tuning stone.
200 for that one.
200?
I blame the king's new law. For every coin spent, another goes to the crown.
Remember everyone, the free market can only be improved by government interference. As it gets kicked around past people in the market and a random-ass alligator for some reason, she bounces off of everyone like a Looney Tune trying to catch it before it falls into a dark tunnel. She goes to retrieve it, which turns out to be way harder than she expected as she barely fits through the entrance. She then discovers the fucking Bat Cave and decides to use her Spelunker Soprano to find the tuning stone, which if she would have just used her eyes she'd have seen was 6 feet to her left. Instead, her unnecessary opera awakens an unseen creature. It's the Balrog, it's totally the Balrog. I mean, who are they seriously trying to catch off guard here? It's probably the most famous scene from the films. It's like they can't decide whether they want to appeal to people who know the movies or not, so they just end up appealing to neither. King Darimbacil calls a session of the Dwarven House of Representatives to explain that he will give all the Dwarven lords their rings if they could simply waddle their lazy asses to his kingdom. He then begins rewriting the zoning laws of Khazad Dum.
Who set these restrictions?
Well, you did so, decades ago.
When he realizes his ring isn't on and goes through withdrawals.
You said your hand was feeling heavy.
Durin rushes in to tell everyone not to dig further under the mines, as that's where the artist soon-to-be-called Balrog is. But Darimbacil doesn't give a fuck because there's gold in them dar hills. Mines. In them dar mines.
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
Furthermore, Elephant's ability to hear the mountain ain't shit because he can see it, and so she's mistaken. There is no danger. Back in Eregion, the tools from the forge begin acting on their own before the whole place turns into the set from Final Destination. But it's actually this chick who had already been so invisible up to this point, I had to get her name from IMDb. Turns out it's Merdania, by the way, not that it really matters. She begins to explain what she was seeing on the other side, which is clearly the he who shall not be named until he is named Balrog. Again. You know, Amazon, you're really hyping the shit out of this. If it looks terrible, you're gonna be memed into oblivion. Brimboob asks them what they did differently to make such an unstable ring, and like an elven Gordon Ramsay is appalled with their ingredients.
No. If you'd wanted to do that, you should have...
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
Idiot sandwich what?
Moranitar tries to coax out the needed information, which he should already know. And right as Brimboob is about to tell him, the most overused of all plot-lengthening tropes occurs. The mid-sentence interruption.
My Lord Celebrimbor.
Because no one in these shittily written shows could ever just say hold on a second while they finish what they were saying, you know, like a normal person. The guard informs him that Durin has arrived. So once again, distance and time just don't... You know what? Never mind, I'm sick of saying it. Durin informs Brimboob that the ring is changing his father, making him into a greedy, cold individual, which goes against his nature. Suggesting the rings are corrupted, he sparks the ire of Brimboob, who says there's simply no way, the materials are exactly the same as the elven ones. The word assemblers seem to want to treat the dwarven rings as if they're the one ring, because that's a thing that worked in the movies, completely ignoring that isn't how they work at all. Since Brimboob scoffed at his original hypothesis, Durin suggests an alternative theory. That maybe, just maybe, the dude Brimboob barely knows that's helping him make these rings might just be a little shady. Now, where could he possibly get that idea from? Moranitar begins to work on manipulating Merdanaïve by telling her that Brimboob is diminished. Honestly, that could sum up the brain capacity of everybody on this show. He also tries to get in her pants by comparing her to Galadriel. Cut back to Numenor, we join Ellen Discount and He Who Refused to Simp, Chadendil, as they are part of yet another ceremony for those who fell in the attack. Look, I get it was a huge tragedy, but this has to be about 9 ceremonies in a week. But then again, who knows, it might actually be a decade. Just as they all set their flaming Reese's cups afloat, Seaman prematurely ends the ceremony.
This never happens to me.
Further establishing he's a piece of shit, he condemns the temple so they can demolish it for a new aqueduct. Eminent domain sucks, doesn't it? The soldiers begin strong-arming people, and finally Ellen Discount can take no more and punches the smug sack of dick liquid right in the jaw. Picking himself up off the ground, he goes to return the favor, and just as Seaman is about to make contact with Elendil's face... Ew! Dude! He is stopped by Chadendil, who hits him with this sweet blast double. Unfortunately, that's the only good thing in this fight, as they proceed to make the jujitsu guy and me cry at this sad display of grappling. Seriously, I could probably do an 8-minute long video on just how bad this 10 seconds is. Chadendil nearly ends up being drowned by Seaman before somehow turning the tide and breaking Seaman's shoulder and staring him down with the most epic crazy eyes. Precious! Honestly, this character's probably the only one I like in the entire show. I really hope he... And he's dead. Motherfucker, why? The one time they're able to successfully replicate Game of Thrones and it's with the one character I wish they wouldn't. The guards then arrest Ellen Discount. In Eregion, Brimboob and Moranitar are arguing over the dwarven rings. Again.
You see daggers where there are none. And you ignore them till they are right at your throat. Just be mindful someone is not manipulating you.
There are so many red flags, China is gonna start displaying them in Tiananmen Square. Brimboob asks Moranitar if he altered the dwarven rings, which he denies, because of course he does. Who would ever admit to sabotage? But he postulates that the deception surrounding them may have been the corrupting factor, implying that the cause is the letter sent to Gilgadummass by Brimboob. So apparently we're meant to believe that these rings can pick up on the vibe in the room from someone sending a telegram. Moranitar suggests that they either go to Lindon and confess or continue to forge more rings, the latter of which Brimboob decides to go along with. Because I guess doing the same thing expecting different results is just in his nature. Side note, that's not actually the definition of insanity, so the next time you hear someone say that, please correct them. It's actually the definition of stupidity, which is very fitting. Once again in Khazad Dum, Durin is still trying to convince Durimbacil that the rings are no good, but stops as soon as he's offered his prince's dog collar back. Much to the chagrin of Elephant Lady, who makes him swear to never wear a ring. Seeing as how they're married, I think that technically counts as a hall pass. Principal Brimboob scolds the Elvish High School Metalworks class and lays out his plans for how they will fix everything.
In the only way we can, by completing the rings together. They must draw strength from the 3, and somehow redeem the 7.
Then he storms off to have a nervous breakdown while Moranitar gives the halftime speech.
Do not be discouraged.
Little late for that, don't you think?
The next morning, the orcs arrive on the outskirts of Eregion, at what I think is the same time that L. Ron Hubbard shows up in Lindon to warn Gilga Dumbass and plead with him to send the armies. A request which is denied.
Our armies cannot defeat both Adar and Sauron. Not alone.
So like, you're not even gonna try to save your people? Back in Mordor, Galadriel is taken out of her stripper cage and immediately threatens Adar cause you know, that's just smart. But he informs her that he wants to be friends so they can both fight Moranitar together, and the episode fades to black. From the company that brought you a few services you use and about a dozen that you don't, comes the next shovelware that you can't delete from your Fire tablet. Now available to all Prime members, Amazon Waste, the first and only geopositioning procrastination service. Through the social experiment known as Rings of Power combined with the endless surveillance echo devices you willingly put in your homes, we have been able to gather enough data about mindless consumers to realize that you will literally do anything as long as we suggest it. So we're pairing consumers directly with local mind-numbing activities to waste their time. Activities such as purposely rerouting you into traffic jams, settling dumb arguments between old people, and picking up dog shit left on the sidewalk by someone whose life is filled with way more important things than yours is. Simply load up the app and get endless notifications about boring, repetitive, and idiotic tasks in your area. And let Amazon waste your time today. The episode opens up with Black Legolas getting in his morning cardio out in the middle of nowhere when he spots 2 orc defectors.
I don't care what they call us. Anything's better than dying to help Adar chase a ghost.
He is then snuck up on by a 3rd orc who apparently the other 2 were attempting to leave behind because they sure as shit weren't waiting for anyone. All 3 then attempt to gangbang him, but it's no problem for Black Legolas, who easily dispatches them. Because you know, a 3-on-1 advantage and getting the drop on someone isn't enough to make a difference, it seems. After our melanin-abundant elvish friend is done posing to no one in particular, he loots the bodies and discovers a map which leads to Eregion. Okay, what are the odds that the fucking navigator decided to quit that morning, took the map with him, and Black Legolas just happened upon him? Especially considering we, the audience, know at the end of the previous episode the orc armies are already near Eregion. This is awfully convenient to tell the hero exactly where he needs to go. Also, where the hell are we even? Last time we saw Black Legolas, he was in Pelargir, a port city of Gondor, which is weeks of travel by foot from Eregion. And these orcs are talking as if they just left their group, which only recently arrived from Mordor. And that's even further and through mountains. So none of this is adding up at all. A great way to start an episode. Speaking of Eregion, Celebrimboob is busy toiling away at Rings for Men, a task which seems to be driving him just a bit mad.
Why do you still defy me? That you resist my hand.
The invisible chick from the previous episode informs him that he's riding the metal shop class too hard and depleting their resources.
More mithril.
There is no more mithril.
Must I do everything myself?
In response, he asks the single most accurate question one could possibly have about this bloated-ass cast.
What is your name again, Smith?
Do you mean you don't remember?
No, we don't, because you're an irrelevant character with 0 differentiating features. They are then interrupted by Moranitar, who calls a timeout. Brimboob is clearly showing signs of early onset Alzheimer's, as he's unable to remember even the smallest details, such as the location of his hammer, which is right next to him. Moranitar informs him that the people of Eregion wish an audience with him, but Brimboob states that the most important responsibility he has is to the rings and that he can't waste time. Which is funny because he was literally told he doesn't have the proper materials anyway.
The dwarves have been tardy with their delivery.
So he easily could be using this downtime to, I don't know, not piss off the public? Since Brimboob refuses, Moranitar decides to address the incredibly small audience who are supposed to represent the populace of Eregion.
There are dozens of us. Dozens!
They must have really trimmed the extras budget. He's informed that the merchants and travelers have ceased and a warning has been sent via one of their soldiers.
Bury him. Show this to no one.
You know, except for the 24 or so elves who could see it from where they're currently standing.
My lord, the carving on the body. What did it say?
Where is he?
In an orcish encampment that's somewhere, Adar and Galadriel sit down to a fine brunch which includes fresh berries, you know, those things that are so abundant in the hellscape that is Mordor. They have a nice Mordor and chill before he catches her off guard by whipping it out.
Morgoth's crown.
And suggest that together with the power of the Elven Rings, they can rid themselves of Moron once and for all. But before he can make a decision either way, he asks her the all-important question.
Just the tip.
No, not that.
Halbrand is Sauron, isn't he?
In Numenor, Ellen Discount is being tried for treason. Damn, the justice system here moves fast. I wonder how their DMV line is. Fashionista offers to pardon him if he owns up to his crimes, which he does without hesitation. However, he also has to accept Fashionista as the true king, which he flat out refuses to do.
I do not. For Numenor's true ruler is now and to the end of her days, Miriel!
He is escorted out and an alternative approach is suggested by Belzegar.
If the faithful wish to live by the old traditions, they ought to die by them as well.
You know, this dude appears so infrequently, I keep forgetting to give him a funny name. But don't worry, I'll come up with something by the next scene he's in. We have some random flashes of the Harfoots screaming in pain, which turns out to be not Gandalf hallucinating. One can only hope that this represents the very near future. The bearded plot device is still hanging out with the other bearded plot device, Tom Bombadildo. The latter of these still seems to lack any interest in explaining shit.
The secret fire whispers to us, if we have ears to hear. What does the secret fire need with you as a master?
But one thing he does let us know is that not Gandalf has failed every single trial he's had up to this point because he's inept, and this will be his last shot.
Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
Across the desert, Sushi Rice Paper questions strong independent black woman who ain't need no man as to why she doesn't just up and move her whole tribe like the Harfoots do. Strong independent black woman tells the story of how she was once codependent black girl who had a man.
I married my Bramgar in its shadow. When he passed, I buried him under it.
But yeah, I'm sure given the choice between having you buried near him under a tree or surviving, my guess is that he'd pick the one that doesn't have you assaulted by horseback assassins. But I really didn't know the guy, so I could be wrong. Bagel and Trolldoll continue their courtship, which really needs to end for the sake of humanity. Rice Paper and Bagel discuss turning themselves in to save everyone, but opt to fight because, as you know, 3-foot-tall women make by far the best soldiers. Cut back to not Gandalf as Bombadildo has brought him to search for a Gand, which is apparently the word for staff. He needs to find one in a field of endless goddamn sticks with the instructions essentially boiling down to, you'll know it when you see it. Who does this guy think he is, Justice Potter Stewart?
Who?
For the 2% of you who got that joke, I really appreciate you. Not Gandalf would really rather go help Rice Paper, but is told, fuck them Harfoots, you got shit to do. You know, I feel like I've seen this before, only done much better, but where?
If you leave now, help them you could, but you will destroy all for which they have fought and suffered.
Oh, that's right. Now let me ask you something. Would we have viewed Luke as the hero if he just didn't go to help his friends because someone told him it was for the greater good? No, we wouldn't have. He would have been viewed as an asshole. Very similar to how not Gandalf is coming off right now. Dildo then just goes full Batman and vanishes, leaving not Gandalf to play fetch.
Yay! Like a dog. Ow! Ow!
In Khazad-dûm, the dwarves continue to dig deeper and deeper into the mines for gold. Gold that somehow is already items like goblets and jewelry, despite that making absolutely zero sense. Durin arrives thinking Dorimbasil summoned him, but it turns out it was Moranitar, who immediately turns to Dorimbasil to negotiate a trade for Mithril, ignoring Durin altogether. So like, why the hell did you ask for Durin to be here? It seems like he was useless to the situation, and was only there because the word assemblers needed an excuse to have him in the room. Either way, Dorimbasil declines the trade so he can artificially inflate the cost when the war between elves and orcs officially starts. Like some sort of strange bartering military-industrial complex. But completely ignoring the alliance he just formed in the previous episode. This is not to the liking of Durin, by the way.
Take off the ring. Belongs to me.
You belong to it.
Durin pleads with his father to remove the ring, but he refuses, and when Durin attempts to take it by force, he's comically knocked back. This effect is so hilarious looking, they might as well have left the wires in. Durin returns to Elephant Lady, who is convinced that she's big enough to block an entire excavation team if she just lays in the path like Snorlax.
We'll lay our bodies in front of that mine ourselves if we have to.
But Durin isn't interested in fighting back against his father and would rather just cry over the whole situation. You know, like a manly dwarf. Back in Numenor, soldiers are sounding horns to bring forth the sea penis in order to give Ellen Discount his trial by abyss. His daughter tries to plead with him to swallow his pride and just swear loyalty to Fashionista, but he tells her that it's not pride and not to talk to him anymore.
If after all this, all you see is pride, then there are no words left for us to speak.
But then former Queen Amanda Waller staggers her blind ass in without so much as a guard helping her. How did this bitch navigate her way all the way from the tall tower to the dungeon? She commands Ellen Discount to bow to Fashionista, but he'd rather take his chances with the sea penis because he's aware of his plot armor. You know, it's been about 2 minutes since we had a complete location change, so let's just head over to Khazad-dûm. Elephant has officially opted to attempt Operation Snorlax, which includes going full Mount Moon and overwhelming the diggers with Zubats. So one thing isn't making sense to me.
One thing.
In the previous episode, she happened upon the lair of John Doe Balrog. It wasn't especially well hidden or deep in the mines, yet they've been digging and digging and have yet to encounter it. How is this possible? And wouldn't you know it, we're back in Numenor, again. Approximately 10 minutes after the last scene, which means they could have just played those back to back. Ellen Discount is about to meet his judgment when at the last second, Queen Waller, who once again somehow found her way around despite being fucking blind, declares that she will take his place. Told you that plot armor would kick in. A guard then leads Waller down to the water because now she needs help. She is then pulled under the surface and comes face to face with the sea penis, which promptly launches her ass right back up, forcing Lord Balzergon to declare her innocent and Ellen Discount to proclaim that she's now Queen of the Sea. And you're not gonna believe this shit because honestly I'm dumbfounded here.
That makes 2 of us.
This is the very next line from Galadriel.
Yes, Halbrand is Sauron.
What?
He's in Eregion to craft rings that will allow him to dominate my kind.
You cannot make this shit up. About 45 minutes worth of scenes, mostly involving secondary cast and requiring time progression, have occurred between this...
Halbrand is Sauron.
And this.
Halbrand is Sauron.
How is anyone supposed to get a feel for the timeline and pacing when you split literally 2 sentences with scenes that require several days of time passage? Look here, word assemblers, I don't have time for this shit right now, but this is completely unacceptable behavior, and we're gonna discuss this later. Anyway, after about 15 seconds of gibberish which convinces Adar to release Galadriel, they hatch a scheme to take down Moron. I wonder if that strategy will require hiring Peter Jackson to write and direct a significantly better trilogy of films that are supposed to take place a millennia from now. Well, as for this plan, it's pretty straightforward. Just grape and pillage the fuck out of Eregion with hundreds of legions of orcs. Galadriel realizes that this is exactly what Moron wants since he doesn't have an army, but Adar just decides to put her back in her stripper cage. Adar sounds the attack and Eregion goes into a panic because I guess rivers and walls didn't mean shit after all.
Eregion is protected by 2 rivers with miles of curtain wall of dwarven stone.
Also, Moranitar decides to get into cutting to relieve his stress for some reason. Somehow Brimboob can barely hear any of this in his office as he draws rings like they're French girls. But when he finally decides to go check the slightly annoying sounds of possible death from outside, he's blocked by Moranitar who just teleports into the room out of nowhere. Shoving him out of the way, Brimboob leaves, refusing to continue forging the rings. Will this argument ever fucking end? Also, just stating this once again, he can't because he doesn't have the necessary components, so no matter how much Moranitar yells at him...
You belong in here, my friend. We still have 9 rings to forge.
He cannot finish them. Moranitar works some magical bullshit, and going outside, Brimboob sees a false vision of an ethnically diverse Eregion. Honestly, if he can't even recognize his own people, then the first clue that this was fake should have been the fact that it's randomly daytime now.
What do you know? Haven't you heard of suspension of disbelief?
With Brimboob convinced that everything is fine because he's even more of an idiot than we originally believed, Moranitar sends him off to complete the rings with some definitely authentic mithril that he just randomly has. All while the orcs are just firebombing the shit out of the kingdom. As this show continues, it's becoming less coherent. It's nearly impossible to truly follow the flow of any one episode, nonetheless the entire season. Characters are ending up in places far faster than they should, which breaks the concept of arduous travel, a staple of Tolkien. I like to call this phenomenon map compression. Simply put, it's when people who lack skill try to tell a narrative that requires travel over great distances. Rather than using the time effectively, they opt to have a character travel on foot hundreds if not thousands of miles within what amounts to a few hours. Like they boarded an off-screen 747.
Fly, you fools!
This is coupled with randomly decompressing the map when it's convenient for the script. The Lord of the Rings trilogy made a name for itself based on many factors. But one thing which has always stuck with people was the way it utilized giant sections of the story where groups navigated beautiful and fantastical terrains. The films didn't waste valuable screen time, but also didn't ignore the usefulness of world building and character development that could be found in a good travel montage. Just compare Frodo at the end of his journey to Galadriel after hers, which resulted in capture by the orcs. One of them has clearly seen some shit, whereas the other looks like she just came out of the salon despite having traveled through swamps and woods. It makes it feel as if she went from one soundstage to another, ignoring everything in the middle. The travel times or lack thereof aren't the only massive flaw which completely shatters the viewing experience. In order to pad the runtime of each episode, we are exposed to the same exact conversations over and over and over again, sometimes without yielding any new information at all from the previous version. So effectively, we have people teleporting wherever they want to talk about the exact same things with people halfway across the world, only to end up right back where they started, as if they never left in the first place. You almost get the sense that everyone in the word assembly room wishes they could just have Celebrimbor invent the iPhone so characters can have conversations with whoever, wherever, and whenever they want without all the pesky walking. This paired with the fact that this cast is so big you could lose 3/4 of it and not even notice, it all becomes a giant homework assignment of who said what to who, when did it happen, and what was that person's name to begin with. Speaking of terrible utilization of conversations, I think it's about time we had that talk from earlier. I think there is no greater example of the issues of how time flows in this show than the splitting of the scene between Galadriel and Adar. In the beginning of the episode, these two are having a conversation that gets dramatically cut off. After nearly an entire episode which takes place over an indiscernible amount of time and covers multiple days for every other character, we then cut back to the exact same conversation with absolutely no progression for these two. This would have been okay if this split occurred with both parts closer together and way earlier in the episode, but by bookending everything into the middle of a conversation, you have broken your own timeline to the point that we, the audience, have no way to know or care when anything is happening. It has no basis in any linear concept of time flow. It's as if you watched a baseball game, but the innings were randomized. This kind of thing works for a Quentin Tarantino movie because you go into it with that expectation. Also, he knows what the fuck he's doing. The worst part of all of this is that these are problems which could easily be corrected by someone who wasn't the beneficiary of a broken American education system that pushed them through and reassured them that they are skilled writers. This is the issue with gaslighting hacks into believing that they have talent. So what exactly is plaguing this show? Is it the useless characters, the wasted time, or the padded script from pointless conversations? Well, it turns out that the answer to this multiple choice question is D, all of the above. But really all it means is that there's a massive skill issue within the word assembly rooms. Well, with only 2 episodes to go, I felt as though I've already spent a lifetime tearing this piece of trash apart, but at least I've hit the home stretch. I can only hope that something of significance happens in the finale, as I don't know how much more of the same inane conversations I could take. And if that's not enough to convince you that this show up to this point has been a complete waste of an indeterminate amount of time, then I'm not sure anything I could possibly say would do the trick.